On the first day of Christmas, Brigid brought to me the birth of Christ.
Merry Christmas, everyone!
Today we are going to be talking about the birth of the child of light and how a Celtic goddess is believed to be a part of it, at least for those of us who have a Celtic spin to our faith, as we walk together down creation's path. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan Druid and priest of Brigid.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan Druid and sous chef to the Dog.
Today, we are going to be talking about Christmas and everything that entails. The birth of Christ and the most holy midwives who happened to be there helping to bring the Christ child into the world. Here's a little secret for you. It's a story. I am not one of those people who does not believe that Jesus was a historical person. I want to say that right off the bat. If Jesus was real, there's enough historical evidence to show that he was a real person who lived in the first century. He is mentioned very early on in a lot of historical sources. There was a historical person. Now, as far as what we know about that historical person, we have a lot of stories. Some of those stories are complementary to each other, others not so much. What we can say for sure is there was an itinerant Jewish preacher who was a miracle worker and an exorcist who was active in the Galilee and in Judah in the first century, who was crucified. Historically speaking, we can say all of that. We can also historically say that he gave rise to the largest religion on earth, that it descended from him and his disciples going out and continuing to teach. We can say that with a lot of confidence. He was not the only Jewish miracle worker and exorcist around at the time. Nothing in the Gospels ascribed to Jesus is out of bounds for any of the historical figures that we have graves for. Like, that we can go and visit, like, here they are. They were ascribed to do all of this, casting out demons, healing people, restoring sight to the blind. One of them was able to dance in a circle and make it rain, according to the stories. Like, miracle workers in the first century were everywhere. Now, you can have your own opinions over whether they were actually doing miracles, magic, or what have you. That's fine. But to say that the idea of a miracle worker in the first century is insane or crazy or out of the realm of historical possibility, you need to study first century Palestine. That's not out of the norm at all. In fact, it was quite in the norm. Now, the stories that we have about this person were written down a century or more after his death. The earliest gospel that we have was probably written between 50 and 70 AD, probably closer to 70. Jesus probably died around 30 AD, just to put this in historical context. So 20 to 30 years after his death, which is very much a generation after his death. We do not have any written life stories about him earlier. He is mentioned in Josephus, though later Christians did a historical crime and added to what Josephus said, but Josephus did mention him. Josephus actually spent more time talking about John the Baptist than Jesus, which again makes sense for the time that Josephus is writing. But he is mentioned in Josephus, and we have many letters going around about what are we going to do about these Christians who follow this guy Jesus. I don't think we can debate the historicity of the person. I want to say that off the bat because I think too many people disagree on that in a way that is unproductive. Now, the stories that we have about him, some of them are probably true in that we have a lot of his sayings probably do go back to him. Those were probably preserved. Some of the miracle stories are probably at least stories that are contemporaneous with him. Again, I want to give space for people who do not believe that miracles are possible in this conversation, but at least those stories go back to the time that he was alive. Now, the birth narratives are interesting in that they don't appear until Matthew and Luke, and then a bunch of them after that. A bunch. There are a lot of infancy gospels that did not make it into the New Testament that were written that tell either versions of either the Matthew story, the Luke story, or their own version of the story. but they're stories. They're very important stories because they tell you how important this person was. See, what we get wrong about ancient tales is they weren't doing history like we do history. History as a profession wasn't invented until the 1700s. It was invented to create nation states, to manufacture this idea of these disparate groups are one people, and they have a common narrative that generally leads to some image of progress or that this is the best things have ever been. And so most early histories just kind of made stuff up to justify that story. Prior to that, we had chronicles, which were just like catalogs of dates. We have, here are some stories that I've heard that were written before that, but they weren't doing history. This idea that we're going to try to differentiate between what actually happened and what didn't happen was not really of interest until fairly recently. That is a very new concept. All of our older stories, they're telling us about how important a person was, their place in society, and how they fit into the social political order. So Augustus is the son of Zeus. He is semi-divine, and upon his death becomes divine. Well, was he the son of Zeus? No. I would say probably not. This is a story that appears quite late in his story, like he wasn't running around. Like we have speeches of Augustus. We know a lot about Augustus from contemporary writers. This is part of his mythos that gets added on to justify empire.
If you believe the stories of Zeus, Zeus gets around.
Oh, yeah. I'm just saying this is a late addition to the story. It's kind of like, was Alexander the Great the son of a god? Well, that really doesn't come into his story until he goes to Egypt.
Yeah.
And an oracle who had every reason to say as many flattering things to Alexander as possible goes, "Oh, you are a god and a pharaoh. Yeah, you, everything, all the good words, right?" But there weren't arguments about these things because what they were telling us is not a historical fact in the way that we see as a historical fact. They were telling us about the importance of someone. Jesus' birth is different from our births because Jesus is a different kind of person. And we want to show and highlight his difference. Was he conceived of a virgin and born of the Holy Spirit? I personally believe yes. Does it matter? Like if you could prove to me 100% somehow that he was not, would it matter to me? No, because it's not about the historicity of this event. And I think modern Christianity especially has done a violence to the faith by trying to make all of this into historical, concrete events, because the historicity doesn't matter. Like Meister Eckhart said, and remember, he's writing in the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance, right? So his words are ancient almost to us. But even in his time, he was writing, what good is it to me if Christ were born 2,000 years, he didn't say 2,000 years ago, but 2,000 years ago and is not born today? What good is it for me?
Yeah.
And it's a good question.
It's a great question. It's like the problem with modern Christianity, their obsession with Genesis.
Yeah.
Being specifically accurate. In doing that, they rob Genesis of a lot of the mythic symbolism, ritual, the stuff that actually matters, that has a deep meaning to the individual practitioner, gets robbed in all this obsession about being a specific day and however many days a day actually is and all this other stuff.
It becomes mundane.
Yeah, it becomes mundane.
If it's a matter of fact that an angel appeared to a woman, and I say woman, she was probably about 12, and said, you're going to give birth to a child. That's a thing that happened.
Yeah.
If we view this as a historical event, you don't ask any of the important questions that really help grow your faith. What does it mean that the Christ child was born on this day? What does it mean that a star led wise men to this place? Because we're trying to figure out, well, what was the star? Was it a comet? Was it a planetary conjunction? You're missing the point. What does it mean that people of a different faith, because these would have been Zoroastrians, which shows the importance of the messianic symbolism here, that they're saying that he was the Shaushant, that he is the child of light, even to them. And I probably mispronounced that word. My Farsi is terrible. I'm sorry if I did. This is the importance of that story, and you're meant to interrogate those questions, not get stuck on the particulars. So when we say that he is born in Bethlehem, Okay, well, we can argue today, well, was that the Bethlehem in Galilee or was that the Bethlehem in Judea? The point of that story is that he's a child in the line of David. Bethlehem is the city of David. By saying Jesus was born in Bethlehem, you are saying that he is of the royal line. There's no way for us to prove one way or the other whether or not, for whatever reason, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Again, not the point of the story. The point of the story is twofold. One, he's of the royal line, and two, the prophesied Messiah would come from Bethlehem, and they're trying to connect him to that. Does it matter? If you're a stickler, if you think that facts matter when it comes to faith, that faith isn't about symbols only connecting you to something greater that is impossible to say in words, I think we need to have an epistemological discussion about what faith is and the importance of faith. Faith is not believing despite evidence. Faith is trying to have a conversation about things that there really aren't words for. So in saying Jesus is born in Bethlehem, we're saying that he is of the line of David. In saying that he is born in Bethlehem, we're saying that he is the Messiah. We're also saying that good things can come from bad places. Wherever you live, there's a town or a part of a town that's where all the crime is. Whether that's true or not, everybody talks about it. It's that place. You know what it is. You can name it right now without even thinking. There's that bad part of town, that dangerous place that nobody goes. In the time these stories were written, that was Bethlehem. So it's even triply important that they're saying he was born in Bethlehem. It's even the same about saying he was from Nazareth. It's even in the Gospels, and we see this in places outside the Gospels as well, with the question of, can anything good come from Galilee? Because with folk in Galilee were not seen as particularly good people. So when we're looking at these stories, we're looking at them for what are they trying to tell us? What is the important thing here? Everyone had to go to their ancestral city to be taxed. Now people look at this and start looking at, historically, we can't find any evidence that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus about this. We do know that there was a census that was taken 7 to 4 BCE, and that might be what this is referring to, is that census. But people weren't made to do this mass migration. They weren't forced to go back to where they were from. Again, not the point of the story. You cannot discuss the life and times of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, without understanding imperialism and colonization. Half of his teachings that are taken out of context today are rooted in this "we are a colonized people" narrative. If somebody strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them your left. A Roman soldier could hit whoever they wanted. If you struck a Roman soldier, they were entitled to kill you. If somebody asks you for your coat, give them your cloak as well. A Roman soldier could walk up to anybody in the empire and say, give me your coat. And you had to give it to them, or they had the legal right to kill you.
Imagine that. If you were just a regular citizen and a Roman wanted you dead, they would walk up and just hit you, hoping to provoke you to swing back at them so they could legally kill you. Because they couldn't just legally just shank you in the street and leave you dead.
I mean, they might be able to get away with it.
They might get away with it anyhow, but they wouldn't have the law behind them.
Yeah.
But if they struck you and you gave in to anger and swung back, maybe even raised your voice a little too loudly, enough to raise a commotion, they could then just run you through with their spear and would have full legal backing to walk away and nothing else could happen. No repercussion.
So at the heart of the birth narrative of Jesus, we have this imperial disruption as the heart of his story. His pregnant mother and father having to go on this arduous journey from Nazareth down to Bethlehem is such a wonderful image for they had to go back to their roots through all of this Roman oppression. It's a beautiful way to say that in a way that isn't saying it out loud so that the Romans would censor you or come after you for saying Rome bad. You don't have to say the Romans were oppressing his family and his people. You just say, oh, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus and they had to go back to their ancestral homeland to be taxed. A person in the first century, first 5, 6, 7, 8 centuries of Christian history would have heard that and immediately understood they were under the boot of Rome. They were having to pay taxes to people that were giving them nothing. They got nothing from Rome but oppression.
It's a very nice shortcut.
Yeah.
In a way, to maybe help some get this a little bit easier, this is like you're running late and you call your boss. You may say, hey, I was tied up. I'm running a little late for an appointment. Well, everybody understands you weren't physically tied up and being held captive by somebody. They know that there's a longer detailed story, that those details are personal and don't matter to the person you're talking to. Like all this other is implied in the I'm tied up, I'm running a little late.
And it's important to realize that in all of the early Christian discussions of the birth narratives, ideas like this are being floated and how to read the text. The closer you get of a relationship between the empire and the church, the more historicized these events become. Because we don't want you thinking about the ramifications of his family living under colonial oppression in one of the colonies of Rome. If you're a colonizer, you don't want people thinking about that. So you historicize this. Well, it's just a thing that happened. We can move on. You don't want people thinking about the hardship. Imagine a pregnant woman having to probably walk, maybe ride a donkey. I know the popular image is she's riding a donkey. Probably have to walk. Donkeys weren't free. All the way from Nazareth to Bethlehem, just because you had to pay your taxes. The image of colonial oppression there is so strong. Then they get there, and there's nowhere to stay. The empire has put their foot down so hard that basic hospitality can't be offered to them. There are no beds. There's no beds for the pregnant woman who had to make this arduous journey. Maybe we should lock her up. I'm just saying, I feel very modern day narratives coming in to this story. We can see this happening today, right? So they're allowed to stay in the stable. You're putting a pregnant woman where the animals are. You ever had to muck out a stable? I grew up on a farm. I've had to muck out a stable. I wouldn't want to sleep in a stable. It's smelly. There's poop on the floor. And even if you're cleaning it out daily, there's still poop on the floor because as soon as you clean it out, they're like, oh, good, fresh hay, more poop on the floor. And this is where she gives birth, down with the animals. These see the dehumanization narrative that's going on. It's not just that she's forced to move from her home, right? She's forced to go on this arduous journey because of the colonial oppression of the Romans. But now she has to be in this unsanitary, dangerous place to give birth. And they don't even have a place to put the kid. They put the kid in a manger, which is a feeding trough, if you don't know. A manger is a feeding trough.
Yeah, that little box that you see the farmers dumping the slop into for the pigs to eat out of, that.
Yeah. This is a story that's highlighting in the midst of this extreme colonial oppression. The child of light is born. The Savior is born. The angels appear in the heavens. Hark, the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, right? For unto you this day in the city of David is born the Savior, who is Christ the Lord. The anointed one is born. The Messiah has come into the pit of darkness that is this story, the imperial oppression that is embodied in this story. And that to me is the heart of this Jesus narrative, that in the midst of all this oppression and dehumanization, the only people that come are the shepherds. Well, of course the shepherds come. They're literally sleeping in the thing with the animals. It's not till we get to Luke, by the way, the only non-Jew to write a book of the Bible, mind you. That's when we get to Luke, that we have the kings come from the east. And notice we're not talking about them because they don't come. It was up to 2 years later that they show up, even in Luke's version of the story, right? But you can see the oppression here. So it's not surprising that a colonized and oppressed people like the Irish, the Scots, I do believe, I'm not sure if the Welsh believed that St. Vraid was there or not, which is the Welsh version of Brigid. I'm sorry, St. Vraid. Terrible at my Welsh pronunciations. I know you guys keep trying to teach me in the comments. Thank you for that. I'm terrible at my Welsh pronunciations. Try to get better. I don't know if they have the same stories about her, but this idea that Brigid was the midwife. Because the Saint Brigid, while probably a historical person, I do believe that there was a historical Brigid of Kildare who was probably a priestess of the goddess Brigid. It's my personal belief. When I read through the stories, to me, the differences between the goddess Brigid and the Saint Brigid stories those are the parts that are probably about the historical Brigid. Personal belief there. Not alone in that, but the goddess Brigid, because obviously the Saint Brigid wasn't there. She wasn't born for another, 4 or 5 centuries? So obviously she wasn't there. So the goddess Brigid had to be there. Well, why would you put your goddess Brigid there? It only makes sense that the goddess Brigid would be the midwife in this situation. Why? One, she's the goddess of childbirth. She's invoked during childbirth. So obviously, you would incorporate her to the story. She's also a goddess of justice. So yeah, the goddess of justice is going to be in this oppressed situation, bringing about remedy, bringing about cure. Of course, the goddess of justice is going to be there. The goddess of healing is going to be there. The goddess of poetry is going to be there as the word is coming into the world, right? It only makes sense that you would put her there. And also, by doing so, write your own colonial oppression into this story of colonial oppression. Of course, Brigid was there because, like the Jews in the colonized Judea and Galilee, the Irish were colonized and the Scots were colonized. And I don't have enough time in all of the podcast episodes we're ever going to do to list all of the colonized people of Earth, because it's kind of been our thing for quite some time to colonize people. But we see, of course, she gets written into the story. This is a story of hope being born in the darkest of hours. Oh, which kind of makes it kind of nifty that it's happening right here by the winter solstice, doesn't it? And not even directly on the winter solstice. Granted, as we talked about yesterday, the 25th was the Roman celebration of the winter solstice, but not why this holiday is on the date that it is. If you don't know that full story, did an episode about it yesterday on the controversy about the 12 days of Christmas. Go check that out if you missed it. But of course, that's what's going on in the story. And that is really the power of the Christmas narrative. You cannot understand the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth without understanding the oppression he was born into and the traps that were laid for him. Yeah, we can talk about taxation and all of that when we talk about the whole, should we pay taxes? Well, whose face is on the coin? Jesus responds, well, Caesar. Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar and to God's the things that are God's, right? We can talk about all of the other ramifications about that for tax policy and this and that and the other, right? Anyone in the first century would understand if Jesus didn't say pay your taxes, that's an act of insurrection. They're trying to trap him into saying something that will get him killed in an oppressive, colonized state. And we see this a lot in the stories of Jesus. And if you're not reading them from the perspective of he was a colonized person, a repressed colonized person in a colony of one of the most vicious empires that has ever lived in this world. Their solution to, a bad thing happened was, let's just nail all of them to trees.
And leave them up for days.
Until their bones fall off the trees.
Yeah.
Not just until they're dead, but until they've rotted off of the trees. This was an oppressive regime.
And also executions that generally resulted in death. It's sad to say if you're lucky from suffocation, but some unfortunate souls had to dehydrate and die. Like, it's days and days. The reason we're dying.
The reason the Roman soldier stabs Jesus in the stomach when at the crucifixion was to prove that he was dead.
Yeah.
Crucifixion often took weeks to die from. Days to weeks. Remember, one of Josephus' friends was crucified, and he has time to travel around, find the general that was his patron, beg him for days for his friend's life, get the pardon, go all the way back to where his friend was crucified, and get him taken down. And his friend was still alive after having been nailed to a cross.
For those that are going, but they would dehydrate in 3 days. Remember, they would put water in a sponge and give them water just to keep them alive longer, suffering longer. Before
technically it was vinegar. So it would
be sour water. Yeah, it wasn't like it was pleasant water.
Yeah.
But it hydrated them just enough to add to the suffering and prolong the suffering.
The art of torture was profound. And this is the power of the Christmas story. This is the power that we've lost in trying to historicize this event and talk about, well, what actual city was Jesus born in? And I'm not saying that none of that's important. Yeah, that's interesting. That's fun ephemera, but it loses the power of the story. Well, there wasn't actually a tax that went out. You're missing the point. If you miss this, you miss the point of especially in Matthew's gospel, because Matthew gives us a lot of this backstory, right? Because a lot of the teachings of Jesus then are, here's how we are going to live under and resist colonization. And you can see this in the way that Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and other liberation theologians over the centuries have read their own oppression into the story because they can see it because they're living under it too. Yes, Jesus is the liberator, but the liberation does not come till after his crucifixion. He lives under that liberation until he is literally crucified by it and then walks out of the tomb because y'all don't have power over me.
It's about the spirit of justice making.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people miss that when they look at the power of this story, the power of this narrative, and what Christmas really is all about.
And also what it means to me as a modern day practitioner. Because we got to be honest, in the end, for a lot of people is, what does it mean to me?
How do you bring that light?
How do you bring that light? A lot of us are still living under oppressions. It might not be as severe or as harsh, but oppression is still oppression. Justice making still needs to happen. And that is where a lot of that relevance, that meaning comes in.
And a lot of us are living under fear of future oppression. And if we are going to have any connection to Christianity, any connection to the Christ, to Jesus, to however you want to connect to this, you have to start where the story starts, in severe, ridiculous, over-the-top oppression. Because, yeah, historically, did the census make them have to go back to their homes? There's no evidence of that happening. But it's not out of the park of what the Romans would do. The whole point of Roman slavery was to move people around the empire so that they wouldn't have a consistent power base. Oh, this group of people is being a problem. Well, we're going to crucify a huge chunk of them, and we're going to enslave a whole bunch of them, and we're going to scatter them throughout the empire so they can't get back together because they're going to be in a place where no one speaks their language. They cannot speak to each other. Like, it's not out of bounds of the way Rome actually worked. We have to start here in the midst of this colonized imperial oppression. The Messiah, the Christ child, the child of light is born. How can he be born today? And that's really the meaning and message of Christmas. And it's really frustrating how easy it is for those who have a stake in continuing to colonize. Cover it up. Just asking questions. Be careful of people just asking questions. It's a great way to just be a distraction.
Yeah. How genuinely interested are they in that question, in the answer?
Does the question even matter?
Yeah.
Because again, at least for my faith, and I think I can say this very strongly from just an Orthodox perspective, the historicity of any of these events, that's not what the faith is hinged on.
Also, I like to do the hypocrisy test, like for watching the news earlier. And the person was just asking a question that they were asking out of hypocrisy because they didn't ask that question on previous incidences because it was inconvenient to what they're trying to actually do and say. Yep. They didn't care about the answer. They didn't care about the question because they didn't care about it before. Yep. And they only cared about it because it was politically convenient for them now. And that's one of the things where the minute somebody's just asking a question, I'm like, do you really care about the question? Do you really care about the answer? Do you really care about the topic, the subject that's actually being talked about? Because once again, when you can see the mythic imagery behind stuff, when you can see the messages behind it, you can then see it in other things in your life.
Yeah.
When it comes up, you can watch it in the play of politics, even in modern day politics.
So here's the question I have for you. What are you doing to bring the child of light into your life? Whether that's the Christ child, the Mabon, however your tradition or personal beliefs, maybe just bringing the sunlight back, however you see it in your own life. How are you doing that? Do you have a plan? Because now is a good time to be thinking about that. No matter how good off you might be, darkness comes to us all, and we need to have that plan. Whether it's depression or oppression or any of the like, we all need to bring that light back from time to time. So what do? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments. If you're listening to us on YouTube or Spotify, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they don't notify us. So you leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. But then head over to creationspaths.com, click on chat, and you can leave a comment there. And we will see it and be able to get back to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars you can pass our way, think about joining a membership. You have both monthly and annual memberships over there. Or you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Ko-fi is particularly good for one-time donations. Also, we get more of the funds through Ko-fi. I see Dorset on both. And that money really does go a long way to help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our heads, and food on our table. Thank you so much to everyone who does that, including our newest annual subscriber. Y'all you make this happen, and thank you for that. If you don't have any money right now, or if you're not sure if you want to give money to two crazy people in the Midwest who are talking about all of these fanciful mythological things, that's fine. I understand. But please, if you can, if anybody you think would like the work that we're doing, please share it with them. That helps us out immensely. Alrighty. As we're heading out, oh, most holy Brigid, who helped bring the Christ child into the world, and who to this day forges a heart of light and fire within us, that we may bring that light into the world to fight against oppression, to make sure the truth is spoken in this world. Help us and guide us in these dark days, so that we might bring the light back and keep the forge lit. Amen.
Amen. And a partridge in a pear tree.